If you've been on the internet in the past decade, you've probably seen this art style before. It's been dubbed by the internet as the generic corporate art style, and it's currently the favorite marketing tool for big tech companies like YouTube, Google, and Facebook. There are several qualities that make the corporate art style easily recognizable. Bendy, large arms, faces that are blank or smiling, and most notably, a cast of ethnically ambiguous characters displaying the utopian image of diversity and community. They bike, exercise, and hold hands. They make you want to trust these companies and their platforms. Yet despite the bubbly positivity these illustrations exude, more and more people are realizing that these images feel soulless. And partly, it's because the utopian scenery they portray does not match the problematic actions of the companies that use them. Today, I'm going to delve into how companies like Facebook use the corporate art style to maintain a facade of racial diversity, while simultaneously harming their employees of color and non-white user bases. In a broader sense, we'll take a look at racial discrimination in the tech industry, corporations supporting policies that harm marginalized communities, and the importance of how we represent our society through art and design. Let's dive in. In 2017, the design company, Buck, created an illustration model for Facebook's rebranding called Allegria, marking the beginning of the corporate art style's popularity. Buck's website states that Allegria's oversized limbs and non-representational skin colors help them instantly achieve a universal feel. The characters' nondescript skin colors are supposed to make them feel universal, but by painting everyone as purple or green, the art style essentially represents no one. This colorblind take on representation is criticized in sociologist Omi and Wanat's 2014 essay, Racial Formation in the United States. Omi and Wanat describe race as being the strategic differentiation and assignment of meaning to human bodies. They emphasize that while racial distinctions are socially constructed, the impact of race has real social consequences. Dismissing race as an illusion and supporting colorblindness ignores the different experiences that people go through while being perceived as a certain race within our society. So when companies like Facebook take signifiers that have been historically assigned racial or cultural meaning, like afros or headscarves, and slap them onto non-representational blue and purple people, the representation rings hollow. Why must race be ignored for these illustrations to feel universal? Are these abstracted figures more relatable than the portrayal of actual people of color? The corporate art style is used to make companies appear diverse, yet it only serves to ignore real diversity and instead presents empty tokenism. Tokenism which feels malicious when we look at how these tech companies actually treat people of color.
Mark, describe what it's like to be Black at Facebook.
It was tough to walk through the Facebook campus and know that this is a company that promotes inclusion and diversity, but that not being reflected in my day-to-day experiences there.
Just last year, an investigation was launched by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against Facebook for suspicions of systemic racial bias within their hiring practices. The investigation alleges that Facebook uses subjective evaluations, like being a culture fit, to reject non-white applicants. What does being a culture fit mean for tech companies? Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's ideas of cultural capital can apply to this situation. To belong in corporate culture, you must display certain behaviors, skills, and knowledge that these companies deem valuable. This is where it begins to get muddy. Companies have historically deemed Black hairstyles or mannerisms of speech as unprofessional for the workplace, aka as being non-valuable forms of cultural capital. So when Black qualified applicants are rejected for not being culture fits, these companies essentially support the idea that Blackness is not compatible with their corporate culture that values whiteness. These aren't the only hurdles that non-white applicants have to jump through when looking for work. A field study performed by researchers Bertrand and Melanathan found that job applicants with Black-coded names are less likely to receive callbacks than the same applicants with white-coded names. These worrying patterns exist despite the laws in place that prohibit discriminatory hiring practices. For tech companies, subjective qualifiers like fitting into corporate culture are just one of the many barriers that block non-white applicants from being hired. Yet they continue to emphasize how much they value diversity to the public, brushing these issues under the rug and acting as if they're not part of the problem. So far, we've seen that tech companies like Facebook contribute to systemic labor inequalities by perpetuating racial biases against their Black employees and applicants. They then market themselves as diverse through the corporate art style, a form of representation that doesn't highlight people of color, but rather a concept of inclusion. In summary, these corporations support racial inequity while simultaneously absolving themselves from being complicit. It's a cycle of creating problems and then avoiding being held accountable for their actions. Facebook, Google, and other tech companies are funding the technology of the future that could change or harm our social landscape forever. AI algorithms that follow the racist biases of those who program them, ads that are specifically targeted towards certain racial demographics. Facebook's transition into an all-encompassing metaverse is alarming in that it means that they want to extend their influence past the internet, monopolizing over every part of our daily lives. Marx wrote in his criticism of capitalism that the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. As technology becomes more embedded into our lives, we need to emphasize the responsibility of the companies behind them. It already feels hard to implement social change against these corporations because of how much we rely on their products. Though I'm skeptical that any restrictions on these companies will happen immediately, I know that if we don't start now, it'll be nearly impossible to do so in the future as their technology grows even more intertwined with society. Researching the corporate art style led me down a rabbit hole of lies, truth, and design. But somehow, it gives me comfort that these utopian images are discomforting to others. It means that they aren't deceiving everyone, and that the fight against corporate power is not a singular one.